Maya lived a quiet life in a small town, where everyone knew everyone. She was the kind of person who smiled at strangers and remembered the smallest details about people's lives. She worked in the town library, shelving books, helping children find their favorite stories, and guiding older residents who struggled with reading. Though her life seemed simple to outsiders, it was full of small joys. Maya loved watching the rain fall, listening to the wind in the trees, and hearing the faint laughter of children playing in the streets. She had no desire for fame, wealth, or attention. To the world, she was just a humble woman living her ordinary life. One morning, the peace of her small town was shattered. Maya was walking to work, carrying her tote bag filled with books, when two police officers stopped her. They were serious, and their eyes held a weight of authority that made Maya's heart beat faster. "Maya Khan," one officer asked. She nodded, unsure of what was happening. "You are under arrest for fraud and embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent." The words seemed impossible to her. Fraud. Embezzlement. She had never touched anyone's money unlawfully. She felt her stomach tighten as the officers gently but firmly guided her to the car. By the time she arrived at the police station, a small crowd had gathered outside. People whispered and stared, pointing fingers, their expressions filled with curiosity and judgment. Maya's heart sank. She felt the weight of misunderstanding pressing down on her. She was scared, but more than anything, she felt confused. She had always been honest and careful in her dealings. How could this happen to her? Why was she being accused of something so terrible? The case was brought to the town's courthouse, where Judge Rohan presided. He was known for being strict, powerful, and, in whispers, unfair. Many people in the town suspected that he bent the law for those who had money or influence. His courtroom was intimidating, with high ceilings, polished wooden benches, and the judge's chair elevated above everyone else. Maya felt tiny in that large space. She was used to quiet corners in the library, not the sharp eyes of dozens of strangers staring at her, waiting for her to fail. When the trial began, Maya realized something even more frightening. Judge Rohan told her that she must defend herself. "This case is simple," he said with a dismissive tone. "You do not need a lawyer." Maya blinked in disbelief. I don't understand," she stammered. "I have never. The judge waved his hand impatiently. "You will speak for yourself. We will begin immediately." The words hit her like a wave. No lawyer? No guidance? Just her, standing against the weight of the law and the accusations. She felt panic rising, but she forced herself to take a deep breath. She had to stay calm, at least for now. The courtroom was silent except for the rustle of papers and the occasional cough from the audience. The prosecution began presenting their evidence. They spoke quickly, using terms Maya only half understood. Numbers, documents, and statements were thrown at her like stones. She realized quickly that most people would crumble under this pressure, but Maya had always had a sharp mind. Even though she had chosen a quiet life, she had a natural ability to understand rules, patterns, and logic. She took careful notes, listening to every word, storing details in her mind. Outside the courtroom, the townspeople watched and whispered. "She doesn't stand a chance," someone said. "The judge will crush her," another replied. Maya's friends were worried, but they could not reach her. Inside, she felt a strange mix of fear and determination. She could feel the injustice pressing on her, but she also felt a spark of something she had almost forgotten, a quiet confidence in her own intelligence and skills. As the first witness was called, Maya noticed small things others missed. The witness hesitated slightly when asked about certain transactions, glanced nervously at the prosecution, and used vague language. Maya's mind started connecting the dots. She realized that while the accusation seemed strong, the details were not solid. There were inconsistencies, holes in the story, and moments of uncertainty that she could use. She stayed quiet, taking note of each one, preparing herself for when she would speak. Time passed slowly. Every minute in the courtroom felt heavy, every word from the judge or the prosecution seemed louder than usual. Maya could feel her heart beating in her chest, but she also felt a strange calmness. She remembered how she had always loved solving puzzles as a child, how she could read a situation carefully, analyze it, and find the answer hidden beneath layers of confusion. This was no different. The case against her was a puzzle, and she had to solve it to protect herself. During a break, Maya sat quietly in the courtroom, flipping through the documents the prosecution had provided. She read each one carefully, line by line, checking for contradictions. Her eyes narrowed as she noticed small mistakes in the wording, dates that did not match, and figures that did not add up. She realized that these small errors could become her tools. With careful strategy, she could challenge the accusations without losing her composure. For the first time since the trial began, she felt a sense of hope. Meanwhile, Judge Rohan leaned back in his chair, confident that he had already won. He believed Maya would be an easy target, someone who would stumble, panic, and admit defeat. He did not know that Maya had once been a child prodigy in law, someone who understood the intricacies of rules and logic better than most adults. She had given up the legal world to live quietly, but her mind had never stopped learning. Now, hidden beneath her simple exterior, was a woman who could navigate the law with skill and precision. When the trial resumed, Maya stood carefully, taking in the room. Her first words were quiet, measured, but firm. She asked the witness questions that seemed ordinary at first, but gradually revealed inconsistencies in their statements. She stayed polite, calm, and respectful, even when the judge's eyes flashed with irritation. Each question she asked was carefully planned, showing that she was not just responding randomly, but thinking several steps ahead. Even the prosecution began to notice her skill, exchanging worried glances. By the end of the day, the courtroom had begun to change. What started as a simple accusation had turned into a tense, unpredictable battle. People were beginning to see that Maya was not as simple as she appeared. She had depth, intelligence, and courage that could not be ignored. Judge Rohan, for the first time, felt a twinge of unease. He had assumed she would be easy to dismiss, but she was proving him wrong with every careful word and every thoughtful question. As the court adjourned for the day, Maya walked out slowly, exhausted but determined. She knew the next days would be even harder. The prosecution would prepare more evidence, witnesses would be coached, and the judge would likely try new ways to undermine her. But she also knew something important: she had a plan, even if it was not yet fully visible. Her mind was sharp, her observations keen, and her determination strong. She was no ordinary woman facing injustice. She was someone ready to fight with her knowledge, her wit, and her courage. That night, Maya returned to her small apartment, where the rain tapped softly against the windows. She brewed a cup of tea and sat by the window, looking out at the quiet streets. She thought about her life, the choices she had made, and the unexpected challenge she now faced. She felt a mixture of fear, anticipation, and a spark of excitement. For the first time in many years, she felt truly alive, ready to face the battle ahead with patience, intelligence, and courage. The road would be difficult, but she was prepared to walk it, step by step, proving to everyone including herself that even a simple woman could face injustice and begin to turn it into something extraordinary. Maya woke up the next morning feeling the weight of the previous day still heavy on her shoulders. She sat by her small kitchen table, sipping her tea slowly, watching the sunlight spill into her apartment. The world outside went on as usual. The market vendors called out prices, children laughed on the street, and the occasional car passed by. But for Maya, everything had changed. The court awaited her again, and this time, she knew the battle would be harder. She had survived the first day, but that was only the beginning. When she arrived at the courthouse, the room seemed even larger than the day before. The smell of polished wood and leather filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of old papers and ink. People crowded the benches, some whispering, some staring in curiosity. The prosecution was already there, papers stacked neatly before them, eyes sharp and calculating. Maya could sense their confidence. They believed they had her cornered, ready to confuse her, and perhaps they would have, if she had been any ordinary person. Judge Rohan entered, his robe sweeping behind him, his expression stern. He glanced at Maya and gave a slight smirk, as if to remind her that he controlled the courtroom. "We will continue the trial," he said, his voice firm. "Miss Khan, you will continue to represent yourself. Do not waste the court's time." Maya nodded politely. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, her voice calm. Inside, she felt her heart racing, but she focused on the rhythm of the room, the movement of people, and the details she had already observed. The prosecution began again, presenting new evidence. Maya listened carefully as they described bank statements, transactions, and contracts that supposedly tied her to the crime. The numbers seemed overwhelming, and some of the witnesses used complicated legal terms. Most people in the room would have felt lost, but Maya stayed focused. She had always had a way of seeing patterns where others saw confusion. Each figure, each date, each statement was a piece of a puzzle. If she could point out even the smallest mistake, it could make a difference. When the first witness of the day took the stand, Maya noticed something immediately. The witness was nervous, shuffling papers and glancing at the prosecution for reassurance. Maya's eyes sharpened. In her quiet life, she had observed people endlessly, how they moved, how they spoke, how they avoided eye contact when lying or hiding something. She realized that even though the witness seemed confident at first, their body language betrayed uncertainty. She made a mental note. Her first opportunity to speak came when the witness was asked a simple question about a payment. Maya stood, her hands folded calmly in front of her, and spoke in a clear, even tone. "Excuse me," she began politely. "Could you clarify why this payment, dated May 12th, shows a discrepancy in the amount on the statement compared to the bank record?" The witness blinked, caught off guard. Well. I thought," they stumbled, and Maya listened carefully to every word. She did not interrupt, she did not react. She simply took note of the hesitation. The prosecution frowned. This was not going according to plan. They had expected Maya to fumble, to panic, to ask simple, confused questions. Instead, she was calm, thoughtful, and precise. Each question she asked was small but deliberate, designed to reveal inconsistencies without drawing attention to herself. She was like a quiet stream, moving steadily, but carving deep channels in the rock below. Judge Rohan shifted in his chair, frowning. He had expected her to struggle, to show fear, to make mistakes that would allow him to assert control. But she did not. She asked her questions politely, always using logic, and the witnesses began to appear unsure. One by one, small cracks appeared in the prosecution's case. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was there. The audience began to notice. Whispers spread quietly among the observers, a sense of curiosity replacing the usual expectation of defeat. Outside the courtroom, some townspeople had gathered to watch. Maya's friends and neighbors exchanged glances. "She's doing better than I expected," one whispered. She's actually handling this," another said. They could see the calm determination in her face, her careful movements, and the way she listened before speaking. Though they did not understand the legal complexities, they sensed her strength and intelligence. As the trial progressed, Maya began to notice patterns in the prosecution's approach. They repeated certain phrases, relied heavily on witnesses they seemed to trust blindly, and assumed she would be intimidated by the formal setting. Maya realized that these assumptions were their weakness. If she stayed calm and observant, she could anticipate their next move. She began to prepare small questions and counterpoints, storing them in her mind until the right moment. By mid-morning, Maya was ready to challenge the next witness. The person on the stand was confident at first, speaking quickly, using technical terms and asserting authority. Maya listened quietly, nodding occasionally, her pen ready to jot notes. Then, when the moment was right, she asked a question that seemed simple but was powerful. You mentioned this contract was signed on April 5. Could you explain why the document on record is dated April 7th? The witness hesitated, a flush appearing on their face. I must have misread, they murmured. The court murmured softly, noticing the first real sign of doubt in the prosecution's case. Judge Rohan's face tightened. He leaned forward, tapping the desk. Miss Khan, this line of questioning is unnecessary, he said sharply. But Maya remained composed. Your Honor, I only seek clarity. The record shows a different date, which is relevant to the case, she replied respectfully. The judge's irritation grew, but he did not stop her. He could sense the audience's attention shifting. The town, the witnesses, even the prosecution were starting to notice that Maya was not ordinary. During a brief recess, Maya stepped outside the courtroom, breathing in the fresh air. She could feel the tension in the town's air, the quiet energy of people watching her, unsure what would happen next. She thought about her past, memories of a life that had once been full of legal challenges and accomplishments. She had excelled in law competitions as a child, won awards, and even written articles that impressed senior attorneys. But she had left that world behind, choosing a quiet life of simplicity and peace. Now, though, that knowledge, that skill, was resurfacing. She realized that she could use it to defend herself, without needing anyone's help, and perhaps even uncover the truth behind the false accusations. The afternoon session began with a new witness, someone who had been coached carefully by the prosecution. They were confident, almost overconfident, assuming they could intimidate her. Maya watched them carefully, noticing every small gesture, every hesitation in speech. She asked her questions politely, each one measured, each one designed to expose contradictions without being confrontational. The witness began to falter. Their words were careful now, their confidence shaken. Maya did not celebrate, she simply continued calmly, letting the truth unfold in the courtroom. Even the prosecution began to falter. Their strategy had assumed she would panic, that she would misstep, that they could guide the court's perception easily. But they underestimated her intelligence, her patience, and her ability to remain calm under pressure. Each mistake they made became an opportunity for her, and she took them quietly, methodically, without showing any outward triumph. By the end of the day, the atmosphere in the courtroom had changed. What had begun as a seemingly simple case had become unpredictable. The witness's confidence was shaken, the prosecution was uncertain, and Judge Rohan was visibly irritated. Maya, however, remained calm, her quiet composure a stark contrast to the chaos around her. Outside the courtroom, townspeople whispered among themselves, amazed at the determination and skill of a woman they had assumed would be overwhelmed. That night, Maya returned to her apartment, exhausted but focused. She prepared notes for the next day, carefully reviewing every detail she could remember. She did not feel fear or doubt, instead, she felt a growing sense of confidence. The trial had begun, and she was already making a difference. Though she had not yet revealed the full extent of her legal knowledge, she knew she could. Step by step, question by question, she was beginning to change the course of her fate. As she sat by the window, watching the stars appear in the night sky, she thought about the journey ahead. The prosecution would return with new witnesses, new evidence, and perhaps more attempts to intimidate her. But she was ready. She had the skill, the patience, and the mind to face them. And more importantly, she had something that could not be taken away: her integrity and courage. She had been forced into a battle she had not chosen, but now she was determined to fight it with everything she had, proving not just her innocence, but her strength as a person who refused to be underestimated. The first steps of her journey had been taken. The courtroom had already begun to recognize that Maya was not ordinary. She was quiet, humble, and polite, but she had a sharp mind, keen observation, and a steady heart. And as the town slept that night, unaware of the storm that would continue, Maya knew one thing clearly: she would face the trial not as a victim, but as a determined fighter, ready. The next morning, Maya woke with a quiet determination. She could feel the weight of the previous day lingering, but it was no longer fear, it was purpose. She knew the prosecution would come prepared, expecting her to stumble, expecting her to lose control. But she had already seen their patterns, understood their weaknesses, and now she needed to plan her approach for the new day. She prepared a small notebook, carefully writing down key points, contradictions, and observations from the previous sessions. Each word was a step toward reclaiming her life and proving her innocence. When she arrived at the courthouse, the air felt tense. The courtroom seemed more crowded than before. Journalists had arrived, cameras flashed occasionally, and townspeople filled the benches with a mix of curiosity and excitement. Maya noticed the subtle looks of doubt on the prosecution's faces. Her calm and precision the day before had shaken them. She smiled slightly to herself, not out of pride, but as a quiet acknowledgement that her strategy was working. Judge Rohan entered, his face unreadable. His smirk from yesterday was gone, replaced with a stern, focused expression. "We will continue with the trial," he said, his voice firm. "Miss Khan, you will continue representing yourself. Let us proceed." Maya nodded politely, stepping forward confidently. Her hands were calm, her voice steady, and her mind sharp. Today, she would not just respond to the prosecution, she would begin to challenge them more directly, subtly exposing the corruption that had forced her into this situation. The first witness was someone new, called to testify about a series of financial transactions. Maya listened carefully as the witness spoke, noting the slight inconsistencies in dates, amounts, and signatures. Most people would have been overwhelmed, but Maya's mind worked like a fine instrument, sorting through details, identifying patterns, and preparing precise questions. She had learned over years of quiet observation that even the smallest hesitation or misstatement could reveal a hidden truth. When the witness finished, Maya stood calmly. "Excuse me," she began in her polite, measured tone. "Could you clarify why the transaction listed on the statement from June 3 shows a different recipient than what is written on the contract you signed?" The witness hesitated, blinking nervously. I believe there was an error," they stammered. Maya nodded, making no judgment, only noting the contradiction. She repeated her question in a slightly different form, allowing the witness to confirm the discrepancy. Slowly, piece by piece, she built a case that showed the prosecution's evidence was flawed. The prosecution grew visibly frustrated. They had assumed she would be intimidated, that she would fumble with the numbers and the legal terms. Instead, she was calm, analytical, and precise. Each question she asked highlighted inconsistencies in the evidence, each answer from the witnesses revealed hesitation and uncertainty. The courtroom began to shift subtly. Observers who had doubted her before now leaned forward, curious, impressed, and in some cases, beginning to hope. Maya realized that this was not just about proving her innocence. It was about revealing the truth behind the case itself. There were subtle signs that the accusations against her were not simply mistakes, they were deliberate. Certain documents had been altered, witnesses coached, and evidence presented selectively. Maya noticed patterns that suggested corruption at higher levels, possibly even linked to Judge Rohan's own biases. She made careful mental notes, planning how she might expose these elements without provoking the judge's wrath prematurely. As the day continued, Maya called her own witnesses. These were people who could confirm her presence elsewhere, her honesty, and her good character. She asked simple, direct questions that allowed the witnesses to speak clearly and truthfully. The contrast between the prosecution's nervous, sometimes dishonest testimony and her witnesses' calm, factual accounts became increasingly apparent. Each exchange strengthened her position, making it clear to everyone that the case against her was built on shaky ground. Judge Rohan began to show signs of irritation. He frowned, tapped his gavel, and interrupted occasionally, attempting to assert control. "Miss Khan," he said sharply, "this line of questioning is irrelevant." Maya did not react with anger or fear. She replied respectfully, "Your Honor, the information is directly related to the credibility of the evidence presented. I believe the court has the right to clarify these points." Her words were firm, polite, and strategic. She was not challenging the judge personally, only the evidence, and in doing so, she demonstrated both knowledge and tact. During a brief recess, Maya stepped outside and observed the crowd. She saw the curious eyes of townspeople, the whispers among journalists, and even the concerned glances from some officials who had never expected her to perform so competently. She felt a quiet satisfaction not from winning, but from the knowledge that truth and intelligence could begin to overcome prejudice and corruption. In her heart, she knew the fight would not end soon. The prosecution would return with new tactics, and Judge Rohan would likely attempt to regain control. But she also knew she had momentum. She had started to turn the courtroom into a place where facts mattered more than appearances or influence. When the trial resumed, Maya noticed a subtle change in the demeanor of the prosecution. They had begun speaking more cautiously, choosing their words carefully, and avoiding unnecessary confrontations. They realized that their usual strategies of intimidation and assumption would not work. Maya's calm and measured approach forced them to consider every statement carefully, to anticipate her questions, and to avoid exposing their weaknesses. This shift in power, though quiet, was significant. For the first time, the balance of control in the courtroom was not entirely in the judge's or the prosecution's hands. It was shared with Maya, who had quietly earned it through intelligence and observation. One of the most striking moments came when a senior witness, considered highly reliable by the prosecution, took the stand. This witness had been coached extensively to appear confident and authoritative. Maya listened carefully, noting small gestures of nervousness, slight inconsistencies in dates, and pauses in speech that suggested uncertainty. When it was her turn, she asked simple, pointed questions, allowing the witness to answer fully. Slowly, the cracks in their testimony began to appear. The witness struggled to maintain composure, their confidence waning with each carefully crafted question. Judge Rohan's irritation became more obvious. He leaned forward, tapping his gavel in impatience. "Miss Khan, I warn you, focus on relevant points only," he said sharply. Maya remained composed. "Your Honor, I am focused on the credibility of the testimony, which is directly relevant to the case," she replied politely. Her calm, respectful tone prevented any direct confrontation, but her words made it clear that she was aware of the manipulation at play. The courtroom audience, sensing the tension and her intelligence, began to whisper in admiration. People who had doubted her now watched closely, amazed by her skill. By late afternoon, the prosecution's strategy was unraveling. Witnesses were uncertain, their statements inconsistent, and their confidence shaken. Maya had successfully used logic, observation, and careful questioning to reveal weaknesses in their case. The courtroom atmosphere had changed completely. The once certain prosecution now appeared vulnerable, while Maya's quiet, steady approach had earned her respect, curiosity, and attention. As the day ended, Maya gathered her notes, carefully reviewing every detail she had observed. She thought about the next steps, the strategies she could use, and the way she could continue exposing the truth while protecting herself. She realized that this trial was not just about defending herself, it was about shining a light on corruption and dishonesty, about ensuring that justice was not determined by wealth, influence, or intimidation. That night, Maya sat by her window, reflecting on the day. The city outside was quiet, the streets illuminated by soft streetlights, and the occasional sound of distant laughter drifted up to her apartment. She thought about the journey ahead, the challenges yet to come, and the resilience she would need to continue. Though the prosecution would return with new evidence and witnesses, she was ready. She had begun to see the patterns, to understand the strategies, and to prepare her responses with clarity and precision. Maya felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. She had faced intimidation, false accusations, and the power of a corrupt system, yet she had not faltered. She had stayed calm, observed carefully, and responded with intelligence and integrity. She had begun to show the town, the courtroom, and even Judge Rohan that she was not to be underestimated. Her mind, sharp and methodical, had become her greatest tool, and she knew that the days ahead would require even greater focus and courage. As she prepared for the next day, Maya understood one crucial truth: knowledge, patience, and careful observation were more powerful than fear, intimidation, or false appearances. The courtroom had become her stage, and she was ready to continue her silent, methodical fight for justice, proving to everyone, including herself, that even a seemingly simple woman could navigate complexity, uncover truth, and challenge corruption. The first major steps had been taken. Maya had turned doubt into opportunity, uncertainty into strategy, and fear into determination. The trial was far from over, but she had begun to shift the balance. Judge Rohan's authority, the prosecution's confidence, and the town's expectations could no longer dictate her actions. With every careful question, every observation, and every logical point, Maya was quietly taking control, one step at a time, ready to face whatever challenges came next. The following morning, the city seemed quieter than usual, but Maya could sense the tension lingering in the air. News of her calm, precise handling of the courtroom had spread throughout the town. People whispered in markets, coffee shops, and streets about the young woman who had taken on a powerful legal system and held her ground. Some admired her courage, others were curious, unable to believe that someone so ordinary could challenge such authority. Yet, in the quiet of her apartment, Maya prepared as though nothing had changed. She knew the trial was far from over, and each day brought new challenges. Arriving at the courthouse, Maya noticed more people waiting outside. Among them were townspeople, journalists, and even a few former skeptics who now seemed genuinely interested in seeing the trial unfold. The energy was different from the previous days. It wasn't hostile, uncertain, or tense, it was expectant. The courtroom had begun to shift from a place where power alone ruled to a stage where truth and careful thought mattered. Maya felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that her actions were beginning to influence not just the judge and the prosecution but also the public perception of the case. Judge Rohan entered, his expression colder and more controlled than ever. He had clearly recognized that Maya was no longer just a passive defendant, she was becoming a formidable force. "We will proceed," he said tersely. Maya acknowledged his words respectfully and took her seat. She reviewed her notes mentally, considering the witnesses, the evidence, and the subtle hints she had gathered about corruption within the system. Today, she decided, she would begin to address the deeper issues. Not directly, of course, she had to remain cautious, but by exposing the inconsistencies and the hidden motives of the prosecution, she could slowly bring the truth into light. The first witness was a mid-level employee from one of the companies linked to the case. The prosecution had hoped this witness would reinforce their claims, presenting evidence in a way that seemed organized and believable. However, Maya had studied the documents carefully and noticed discrepancies in the timeline, along with handwriting differences and unclear signatures. She stood calmly when it was her turn. "Thank you for being here," she began, her voice polite and steady. "I would like to understand the process followed when these documents were prepared. Could you please explain why the signatures and dates do not align with the records in your office?" The witness shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the prosecution. They had not expected such a direct question, and their uncertainty was visible. I I think there might have been a mistake in record keeping," they replied, trying to sound confident. Maya nodded gently. "Mistakes can happen," she said. "Would you be willing to review the records again to ensure accuracy?" The witness hesitated, then agreed, creating a subtle crack in the prosecution's presentation. The day continued with a series of witnesses, each presenting pieces of evidence meant to support the prosecution's claims. Maya listened intently, taking careful notes and marking each inconsistency. She did not attack or intimidate. She asked questions, encouraged clarity, and allowed the witnesses' responses to reveal gaps and contradictions on their own. By the mid-morning session, it became clear that the prosecution's case was unraveling. Their witnesses seemed nervous, unprepared for such meticulous scrutiny, and the courtroom audience began noticing. Murmurs spread as the inconsistencies grew more evident, and Maya sensed that public opinion was subtly starting to shift. During a short recess, Maya stepped outside, greeted by the curious faces of townspeople. Some nodded respectfully, while others whispered encouragement. She smiled politely, though inwardly she knew the trial was far from over. The support of the public was encouraging, but it was not enough. She needed evidence, solid, undeniable proof to challenge the system and expose the deeper motives behind the false accusations. As she returned to the courtroom, she felt a renewed sense of focus. Today, she would not just defend herself, she would begin to strategically expose the underlying corruption. When the trial resumed, Maya called her next witness, a former employee who had quietly resigned after noticing irregularities. This person had been overlooked by the prosecution, assumed to be irrelevant, but Maya knew their testimony could reveal key information. She approached carefully, ensuring the questions were neutral and factual. "Could you describe the circumstances under which these transactions were made?" she asked. The witness paused, then began explaining, slowly revealing that several documents had been deliberately altered and certain instructions had been given by higher authorities to manipulate evidence. The courtroom fell into a quiet tension. Even Judge Rohan, who tried to maintain an impartial expression, could not completely hide the flicker of unease. The prosecution leaned forward, realizing that the witness's testimony could threaten the foundation of their case. Maya remained calm, listening patiently, and then gently clarified details, asking for dates, signatures, and names. Each answer revealed a new layer of manipulation, showing that the case against her was not just flawed, it had been constructed with intent to mislead. It became clear to everyone present that Maya's intelligence and meticulous approach were unraveling more than just false claims, she was exposing a web of hidden motives. The prosecution tried to regain control, calling for objections, attempting interruptions, and making subtle threats to intimidate witnesses. But Maya's calm demeanor and careful questioning neutralized their tactics. She did not argue or escalate, she allowed the facts to speak for themselves. Slowly, the balance in the courtroom was shifting, not through confrontation, but through reason, observation, and patient strategy. By mid-afternoon, the energy in the courtroom had changed dramatically. The journalists were taking more detailed notes, townspeople were whispering among themselves, and even some members of the prosecution team seemed anxious. Maya had gained subtle but powerful influence over the proceedings, and it was becoming clear that the truth could no longer be suppressed so easily. Every carefully observed detail, every question posed with precision, and every witness testimony that revealed hidden inconsistencies strengthened her position. The most dramatic moment came when Maya discovered an old, overlooked document hidden among the files. It clearly contradicted several key claims made by the prosecution. She presented it calmly, explaining its relevance to the judge and the court. The room fell silent as everyone examined the document. Judge Rohan looked at her with a mixture of surprise and annoyance, realizing that this piece of evidence could change the course of the trial. Maya had anticipated this moment, and she spoke with clarity and precision, allowing the document to speak for itself without embellishment. The impact was immediate. Witnesses who had previously testified in alignment with the prosecution's narrative began to show signs of hesitation. The prosecution itself struggled to explain the discrepancy, fumbling for answers. Maya, however, remained composed, guiding the court step by step through the timeline, using logic, observation, and reason to clarify the truth. Every detail she highlighted reinforced the idea that the case against her was not based on facts but on manipulation and false assumptions. Judge Rohan attempted to regain control, calling for order, but the momentum had shifted. The courtroom now responded to the evidence and Maya's careful reasoning, rather than the power and authority of the prosecution. The energy was no longer about intimidation, it was about truth, clarity, and fairness. Maya could feel the subtle change, the quiet acknowledgement from the crowd, and even from the judge himself, that the trial was no longer straightforward. She had earned a voice, a presence, and the ability to influence the direction of the case. As the day concluded, Maya carefully reviewed her notes, thinking about the next steps. She had uncovered more than she had anticipated: deliberate manipulation, hidden motives, and inconsistencies that could no longer be ignored. Yet, she also understood that the most critical moments were still ahead. The prosecution would regroup, attempt new tactics, and possibly introduce more evidence. But she was ready. She had learned the value of patience, observation, and strategic questioning. She had learned that truth, when presented carefully, could begin to overpower even the most organized falsehoods. That night, as Maya returned home, she felt a sense of quiet accomplishment. The trial was far from over, but she had reached a turning point. She had exposed hidden motives, revealed inconsistencies, and gained the attention of both the public and the court. More importantly, she had discovered that her own calm intelligence, careful observation, and unwavering focus were powerful tools against injustice. She knew the days ahead would be challenging, but she also knew that every step she took brought her closer to revealing the truth completely. Maya understood something crucial now: justice was not only about presenting evidence but about guiding the narrative, showing the truth patiently, and allowing the flaws of dishonesty to be revealed naturally. Each question, each careful observation, and each piece of uncovered evidence was a step toward victory. The trial had become more than a battle for her innocence, it was becoming a story about courage, intelligence, and the quiet strength of someone who refused to be silenced. And as she prepared for the next day, she felt a deep sense of readiness. The prosecution would return with new strategies, but Maya had learned to anticipate their moves, to respond calmly, and to let the facts guide the courtroom. The people were beginning to notice, the evidence was speaking, and the balance of power was shifting. Maya had turned the trial into a platform for truth, and she knew that as long as she remained patient, observant, and strategic, she could continue to expose the hidden layers of corruption and manipulation until justice was finally achieved. The morning of the final day of the trial arrived with a strange calmness. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered, quietly waiting to see how the story would end. Journalists were taking notes, capturing every detail, and townspeople whispered to each other about the courage of the young woman who had challenged a powerful system. Maya could feel the weight of the moment, but she carried it lightly. She had done everything she could to prepare. Her notes were organized, her evidence was verified, and her strategy was clear. Today, she would not only defend herself, she would finally reveal the full truth. When she entered the courtroom, she noticed the judge observing the room more carefully than usual. His demeanor was measured, but Maya could sense that he had become aware of the shifting balance. The prosecution, on the other hand, looked tense, uneasy. They had tried to control the trial in the past, but Maya's careful questioning, strategic thinking, and calm persistence had gradually taken the upper hand. Today, they would have to face the consequences of their missteps. The first witnesses were the remaining members of the prosecution's team. Maya listened quietly as they presented their evidence, anticipating every move. She noticed subtle mistakes, small gaps, unclear references, and statements that contradicted previous testimony. She remained calm, patiently waiting for the right moment. When it came, she asked questions with careful precision. "Could you explain why this document differs from the original records?" she asked. "Was it reviewed before submission?" Her questions were not confrontational, but they forced the witnesses to pause, reflect, and answer truthfully. One by one, the witnesses faltered under her calm, logical questioning. Some admitted they had followed instructions without fully understanding the situation, while others hesitated, unable to explain the discrepancies. The courtroom felt a quiet tension. Even the prosecution realized that the young woman they had underestimated was now leading the courtroom toward clarity and justice. The public present began to murmur, and the journalists' pens flew across their notebooks. Maya was not just defending herself, she was telling a story, piece by piece, revealing the careful truth that had been hidden. After the morning session, Maya called the most crucial witness, the former employee who had carefully documented the manipulations and irregularities. This person had been overlooked previously but now became the key to revealing the full truth. As the witness spoke, a clear pattern emerged. They described deliberate alterations of records, instructions from higher authorities to mislead the court, and attempts to suppress evidence that could expose the wrongdoing. The courtroom fell into silence as the details became clear. Every fact, every subtle manipulation was laid bare. Judge Rohan leaned forward, listening attentively. The prosecution tried to respond, calling objections and making statements, but the evidence was too strong. Maya guided the court step by step, connecting each piece of testimony to the documents, showing the inconsistencies, and explaining how they revealed a pattern of intentional misrepresentation. The careful, methodical way she presented the information left no room for doubt. Slowly, the courtroom began to recognize that this was not just a case of misunderstanding, it was a case of deliberate deception. By the afternoon, Maya had laid out the final piece of her evidence, a series of emails and letters that proved the manipulation from the start. The prosecution had assumed these records would never be discovered, but Maya had meticulously traced every lead, cross-checking dates, signatures, and instructions. She presented the documents calmly, allowing the facts to speak for themselves. "These records show that certain instructions were given to create confusion and mislead the court," she explained. "The inconsistencies in the evidence are not accidental, they are intentional." The judge reviewed the documents carefully. For the first time, his expression softened with understanding. The truth was now undeniable. Maya's patience, intelligence, and strategic thinking had brought clarity where there had been confusion and manipulation. She had turned the courtroom into a place where facts mattered more than power, where careful observation outweighed authority, and where the truth could no longer be hidden. The prosecution realized they had lost control. Their arguments weakened, their witnesses faltered, and their credibility had been undermined. The courtroom was no longer under their influence, it was under the influence of truth and clarity, guided by Maya's careful, strategic presentation. People in the audience began to whisper, nodding in agreement, and the journalists sensed the story they had been waiting for, a story of courage, intelligence, and justice prevailing. Finally, Judge Rohan addressed the court. "After reviewing all evidence, testimonies, and documents, it is clear that the charges against the defendant have no credible basis. The inconsistencies and manipulations revealed today indicate a deliberate attempt to mislead this court." His words were measured but firm. "The defendant has shown remarkable patience, intelligence, and dedication in presenting the facts clearly. Therefore, I rule in favor of the defendant. All charges are dismissed." A quiet wave of relief spread through the courtroom. Maya felt a deep sense of satisfaction but remained composed. She had prepared for this moment, but she had also learned the value of patience and humility throughout the trial. Justice had been achieved, not through anger or confrontation, but through careful observation, logic, and unwavering focus. The truth had emerged naturally, guided by reason and evidence. As Maya left the courtroom, she was greeted by applause from the townspeople and journalists alike. People who had doubted her courage now recognized her strength. Those who had whispered skepticism now openly praised her intelligence. She felt a mix of pride and humility. Pride in what she had achieved, and humility in recognizing the lessons learned along the way, the importance of patience, careful preparation, and calm reasoning. That evening, Maya returned home and reflected on the journey she had endured. The trial had been more than a legal battle, it had been a test of character, intelligence, and perseverance. She had faced doubt, fear, and the pressure of powerful opposition, yet she had remained true to her values, careful in her approach, and determined to reveal the truth. The experience had transformed her, instilling confidence and a sense of responsibility to always act with integrity, regardless of the challenges she might face in the future. Maya's story quickly spread beyond the town. Newspapers, radio stations, and online platforms shared her courage and intelligence, inspiring others to stand up for truth and justice. People began to recognize that even in a world where power often overshadows honesty, patience, observation, and careful reasoning could lead to fairness and clarity. Maya had become more than just a victorious defendant, she had become a symbol of determination, courage, and the power of intellect. In the weeks that followed, Maya continued her work quietly. She organized community discussions, helping others understand how careful attention, logical thinking, and evidence-based reasoning could overcome manipulation and falsehoods. She encouraged young people to question assumptions, seek truth, and approach challenges with patience and clarity. Her experience had shown her that justice was not just about winning a case, it was about inspiring awareness, fostering integrity, and encouraging thoughtful action in everyday life. One afternoon, a young student approached her during a community meeting. "I heard your story," the student said, eyes wide with admiration. "I never imagined someone could face so much pressure and still stay calm. How did you do it?" Maya smiled gently, thinking back to the long days of preparation, observation, and careful questioning. "It wasn't easy," she replied. "But I focused on the facts, stayed patient, and trusted that the truth would emerge if I stayed steady. Courage doesn't always roar, sometimes, it is quiet and steady, guiding every action carefully." Her words resonated deeply, not just with the student but with everyone present. Maya realized that her journey was not just about the trial, it was about the impact she could have on others. By showing that patience, intelligence, and integrity could overcome deception and fear, she had created a ripple effect, inspiring others to approach challenges thoughtfully and courageously. Months later, Maya reflected on the trial from her small apartment, now filled with notes, letters of thanks, and reminders of the journey she had endured. She thought about the people she had met, the lessons she had learned, and the challenges she had faced. The trial had taught her more than legal knowledge, it had taught her resilience, strategic thinking, and the power of quiet determination. Most importantly, it had shown her that truth, when approached patiently and presented clearly, could prevail even against the most formidable obstacles. Maya's life gradually returned to normal, but the experience had changed her forever. She continued to study, learn, and help others, using the lessons from the trial to guide her decisions. She had discovered her own strength, the power of careful reasoning, and the impact of truth revealed with patience. The trial had ended, but its lessons remained, guiding her every step and inspiring those around her to approach life with integrity, clarity, and courage. In the end, Maya realized that victory was not just about proving innocence, it was about showing the world that honesty, intelligence, and patience could illuminate even the darkest corners of injustice. Her journey had been long, challenging, and at times frightening, but it had also been a journey of growth, resilience, and inspiration. And as she looked toward the future, she felt confident, knowing that she could face any challenge with steady courage, clear reasoning, and unwavering dedication to truth.